Welcome everyone today for our presentation and panel discussion on disability and chosen family. My name is Maddie Wagner. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the social media specialist at the Olmsted Implementation Office. I'm a white woman. I'm wearing clear glasses and a green sweater. And in my background is a window and a piece of art in my home office. So with that, we can get started and move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so for today, we do have ASL and CART captioning available. If you'd like to use CART, click the CC closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. There also is a link in the chat to that. And we do have ASL interpreters who will be spotlit throughout today, but if you'd like to pin them, you can do that by hovering over their screen and clicking the three dots that appear. So we can move on to the next slide. Our hope for today is that this event is accessible to everyone. So whatever that looks like for you, please feel free to use the space you're in as you need or prefer. You can communicate today through your body, voice, other methods. Feel free to close your eyes, draw, doodle, write, or fidget. Really whatever you need to do to be comfortable in today's presentation. If you do have comments or questions throughout, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you don't feel like sharing with everyone, you can send messages directly to me. With that, just a safety note, please don't share personal contact information in the chat or really at all today. We just want to make sure your information stays safe. Today's presentation will be shared with you so you can later access all of the links and resources and information that is talked about today. And we're also recording today's event and we will be sharing that next week. So we can go on to the next slide. And let's get into introducing some of our panel members and presenters today. So first up, we have Charlie. Charlie is the Deputy Director at CloseKnit. And although she is new to working on homelessness prevention, she is not new to homelessness. She has worked in the disability advocacy field for 20 years and has been deeply involved also in doing advocacy work for the LGBTQ rights. Charlie also presented at part one of this event series back in September, so she may look familiar to those of you who attended that. Next, we have Michael, who is the Director of Operations and Development at CloseKnit. Michael has lived experience with housing instability, and he is also a founder of the nonprofit LEAN, which strives to foster a network of lived experience advocates across the state. We can go on to the next slide. So our other two presenters and panelists today are Scott, who leads life sharing efforts at the Department of Human Services Disability Services Division. He has over 30 years of experience in the disability field and is a certified trainer with a variety of person-centered planning processes. And finally, we have Courtney, who is the Director of Individual Advocacy and Evaluation at the ARC Minnesota. She leads the ARC's individual advocacy work, supporting people who have disabilities navigate supports. Courtney also has experience as a coach, group facilitator, and a person-centered planner, and she also presented in part one of this series. With that, we can move on to the next slide, and I will pass it over to Courtney to share a bit more about the ARC.
Everyone, thank you for the introduction. My name's Courtney. I use she and her pronouns, and I am a white woman with brown and blonde hair, and I am in my office with a brown shelf behind me. I am going to give just a short introduction to the ARC Minnesota since we talked about it at the last one. We are a statewide nonprofit that has been providing advocacy and information for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their trusted supporters for over 75 years. We believe people with disabilities are inherently strong, powerful, capable, and resilient. They have the power to change systems and society, and we want to help them do that. We believe that communities should be centered in justice and all people should have belonging and freedom. So today's topic of homelessness and housing are really important to us. We do have many programs and services, and I highlighted a few of them in part 1 of this series. But if you're interested in learning more about the ARC, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be around to answer panel questions later and to answer anything outside of this presentation today as well. But for now, I'd like to pass it off to Charlie from CloseKnit.
Hi again. It's good to be here. So my name is Charlie. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the deputy director with CloseKnit, and we really are focused on preventing youth homelessness, essentially. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about one of the methods we use to do that. And we're driven by shifting the narrative away from sort of brick and mortar conversation and more into permanent connections, because we believe that's the most impactful route to preventing youth homelessness. So as of right now, we're doing that through, creating resources for people to, navigate the systems around them. Legal and legislative systems can be challenging. So we have resource guides on our website to help with that. We're also working with legislators to change policy and just invest in chosen family hosting arrangements as a means of preventing youth homelessness. And then, working with landlords to help make renters' lives a little easier when it comes to hosting youth. We can go to the next slide. So, one of the things that we talk about when working with community partners is thinking about where you would have gone in a moment of crisis. So 1 in 10 young adults will face homelessness over the course of a year. And so I just want to encourage everybody right now to think about, if you were for some reason to lose your home right now, where would you go? And sometimes it's really easy to think of, oh, well, my best friend, I absolutely know I could go there. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a challenge to think, well, I have no idea where I'd go. I mean, I have a kid, or I have, animals, and there's a lot of other factors involved. But think about where you would have gone. And so this is something that we encourage people working with youth who are facing homelessness, to help them navigate that conversation. If you go to the next slide, we have what we call circle maps and circle mapping. And so this is a method that we've used to try and get youth to think more deeply about their permanent connections or opportunity for building permanent connections. So let's see. At CloseKnit, we're really invested in chosen family. And so just to define that, we have the definition up here, but it's any individual, whether they're related or not. It could be a grandma or a best friend, who sort of is the family for youth or for you. And these relationships provide youth with stability. And unfortunately, the way the system is set up right now, there's a lot of challenges and barriers for people who are kind of engaging in that radical act of love and hosting youth in their life. There's barriers to doing that without, risk to their own resources. So there's, renters have a hard time hosting youth for longer than a couple weeks, because it's often against the renter policy, for example. But the relationships and the permanent connections are much more important and impactful for youth than if we were just putting, offering them a spot in a shelter, right? Because then they're sort of being removed from their community. The fact is, there's a lot of youth who are facing homelessness, who are already, being loved by somebody in their life. Who they're already being hosted periodically here and there. And what we want to do is stabilize those relationships. So getting youth to think about who is in their lives already, who could be an impactful person who could be their sort of chosen family. We have this tool here called Circle Maps. That's what we call it. And it's really just a way to help you think about like who is always there for them, who is sometimes there for them, and who could be there for them. It's also a way to ask them about like current relationships, and if they have current relationships that maybe aren't super healthy for them, they could have some folks who they don't want in their circle at all. But this tool is a way to really get all of us to think about how connected we are to the people in our lives. Let's see. We'll go to the next slide. All right. When we're doing Circle Maps training in the community and with other partners, there are some good things that kind of come with this conversation and some heavy things that come when you're asking youth who are potentially facing homelessness. There's obviously some heavy things that can come up while you're having those conversations. So things to watch out for are, hyper independence. So if a youth is kind of saying, well, I'm on my own, I don't actually need anybody. Really encouraging them to think about like, where did you get your last meal from? And where'd you sleep last night? And, or, who helped you get to work? Those are good questions to ask to get people to think about more of their current connections. Also something to watch out for when you're talking to youth is kind of imposing your judgment on. Youth have people in their lives, and they might not be somebody that as an adult, a caring adult in their life, that you're like, oh, that person might not be good for them, right? But that's not really our decision to make. That's the youth's decision to make. And I think through having open conversation about it, what we've learned is that a lot of the youth might have somebody who, we'd consider an abuser in their always circle, but as they develop understanding about those relationships they have in their lives, they begin to learn for themselves that there are people that they maybe don't want in their life and people that weren't good for them. But for now, it might be, and in this initial conversation, an abuser is their always person. So just trying to not be judgmental during that process, I think, can be really helpful in building the trust that that we might need as sort of staff or adults in their lives who are trying to help them figure out who these permanent connections can be. Some great things that come from it, though, is just reframing how they see the people in their lives. So I know for myself as a youth who, when I was a kid, I've always said I've lived on my own since I was 15. And that meant that I didn't live with my parents, right? I was on the streets, running around, trying to work, trying to stay in school. It wasn't working because I didn't have a stable place to live. And so I always just thought, well, I'm out here on my own and I have to find resources on my own. The fact is that I had a lot of people in my life who let me sleep on their couch, or who fed me when I needed food, or who gave me a ride to South Bay when I needed it, etc. So if I had been able to really think about those relationships more intentionally, it's possible that I wouldn't have had such an unstable living situation for so many years in my life. So I really wish I had this tool back when I was when I was facing homelessness as a young person. But I'm really thankful I have it now. So I think that it's also an opportunity when you do the Circle Maps to ask questions about why relationships aren't there anymore. Why aren't you close with your aunt or your grandma anymore? Why isn't that somebody you can turn to? What are the reasons that you can't rely on your neighbor anymore, right? and really thinking about like, is there a way to restore that relationship and do you want to? So that's a good conversation starter for youth as well. And then I also think like over the course of having conversation about permanent connections, the youth involved hearing your, your personal experience, hearing experience from their peers and just other people involved in the conversation, I think really is a major educational opportunity for young people who don't necessarily have good examples of a healthy relationship in their immediate day-to-day, but they kind of come to that during the process of doing circle maps with people. And then, something else that I think is important is understanding that when you're doing circle maps, there isn't any way that the circle map should look. And everybody's circle map is different. And I think that it would benefit everyone, even in this call, to do a circle map activity just for yourself, just to see, number one, what it feels like to think about your relationships in that way. And then also some questions that pop up for you that, if you ended up using this tool with a youth, those might be good questions to ask or think about. So let's see, what do we got next? In the next slide. Yeah, questions. Anybody? Yeah, feel free to drop questions in the chat and or send them my way some other way. But I think, we can probably move into live sharing if we're, yeah, so we'll hand it over to Scott for this next section. And we'll keep track of your questions as we go.
Okay. Is hear me okay? Okay, here I am. All right, again, Scott Shefsky, you saw a little bit of my bio, he, him pronouns, here in lovely St. Paul, recovering from COVID. I was in bed for 2 days. I didn't think I was going to make it, so if I'm a little blurry, yeah, but thanks to the folks that are hosting this and thanks to our interpreters. Like my bio said, I got 30 years of experience doing a variety of things, and I actually worked at the ARC Minnesota for 16 years. There were great years of my life doing a great many things at the ARC. So kudos to all my friends and colleagues there. So I'm just going to dive in, and this is just going to give you some core concepts and overviews. I encourage you to engage with me, and my contact information will be at the end. But again, I work in the Disability Services Division, and I do a variety of things, and this is one project in which I'm leading. So I want folks to understand the vision and some of the roles and responsibilities who choose life sharing. And before I just jump in, I want to say this is one choice amongst many in our disability services system of where people can live and who they can choose to live with. Okay, next slide, please. And I apologize if I cough on you. Thank God we're in virtual reality here, if that makes any sense. So what's the vision? It's an option that matches a person with a disability with a caregiver who shares their home and relationships. Relationships, I think, is the most important thing, in our disability services system. And I'll talk about this life sharing agency that facilitates a robust matching process. If you get anything out of this today, this is about carefully matching people and building relationships over time to help people get to know each other. And that life sharing agency is going to use person-centered approaches. There are tools, there are skills and person-centered thinking and planning that are embedded in our guidance. And you'll see that guidance, it's the last bullet, information how to choose life sharing can be right there. But you can use your old pal Google and just put life sharing matching and ongoing supports in Minnesota, it'll pop right up. But back to the second bullet, people who choose life sharing typically do not want to live in a group home. or live in their own home. And it's kind of one of those middle services where they prefer to live with a non-related caregiver who shares their values, interests, personality characteristics. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Next slide. And I am watching the time, Courtney, so I'll get us moving in about 8 more minutes. So host home, you know, this is in the guidance, just so you know, but a little bit on the language. Host home, you may have heard, shared living and life sharing are all terms that refer to relationship-based arrangements. To provide some statewide consistency, we chose the term, and it wasn't just me, it was a variety of stakeholders several years ago that came together that chose the terminology life sharing to describe the matching process and living arrangements. So having some statewide consistency and knowing what we're talking about, I think is important. So life sharing, I think it's a person-centered concept and name. So it's not a formal waiver service, but we are using existing services. If you look at this link there in our resource page, that includes information about how lead agencies, providers, and people that are interested in this, using those existing services. There's much more detail in the guidance, and I just don't have time to get into that today, but read it and find me, call me, email me, Zoom me, whatever works for you. Next slide, please. Okay. Connections. I'm using synonyms, connections, relationships, matching. It's about how people open their homes and their lives to a person with a disability, and they're compensated to do so. Our system's set up to compensate caregivers to provide person-centered support to people. Okay, next slide. Again, I just want to drive home those values. All are welcome. I want to hit on these points because I think they're very important, and I am just going to read them to you because I've thought an awful lot about this with all of our stakeholders. There are no prerequisites for people to choose life sharing. There is no readiness test. What happens is individually designed services using those person-centered practices and that careful, robust matching process. Second bullet, people who choose to share a life with someone who had a disability are adults of all ages, genders, races, nationalities, and religions. They are single people, college students, single parents, empty nesters. The 2-parent families with children can live in these arrangements. And again, I'm going to use the terminology, this is specific to life sharing ongoing support arrangements. There are some other ongoing support arrangements people can move to after the match, and my last slide will show that. And third, I'll paraphrase a little bit, but most people with disabilities and life sharing arrangements, they work, volunteer, they're involved in their community. And as I stated, I want people who use this service to be very creative in how they go forward and build those relationships. But specific life sharing is no more. It's about one person at a time and no more than 2 people who receive services that might be siblings, a committed couple, or typically nationwide. And I've researched over 30 different states. Typically, it's one person matched with a family or individual caregiver, etc. Next slide, please. Again, this is all the guidance. This slide came from I don't know, why did I'm going to say it, groovy social worker up in northwestern Minnesota. And this is what she sees as the benefits of life sharing. More consistency, living in a family home with people they want to be with. More personal and comfortable. It feels like a home, just not a house or some type of group home. Your space feels more like your own. Have better relationships. You share a life with an individual, the family, versus staff who might be strangers. Feel cared about and overall better quality of life. So that's the perspective of one of our health and human services social workers in Minnesota. Next slide, please. Matching process. How is this different? There's a robust person-centered matching process that we pay for. A county can authorize that. And it's a market rate service that life sharing agency can facilitate that process, but also bill for it. So intentionally paying an agency to facilitate this matching process and recruit people. We're not talking about open beds, slots, etc. We're talking about robust relationship building. Second one, a little bit jargony here, but the individual family does not need to enroll as a Minnesota healthcare program provider with that 245D license. Instead, that individual or family caregiver can work with one of those life sharing agencies that offers quality oversight and manages all the aspects of 245D compliance matters that are very specific to that person support plan or person-centered plan. And again, last bullet, life sharing is about one person being matched with a family or caregiver. It's not a home with shift staff with multiple roommates. Okay, next slide, please. Eligibility, all of our disability waiver programs in Minnesota. And again, you can find me with questions on these. Next slide, please. High level today. Life sharing includes, three main entities: the person that receives disability waiver services and wants to be matched with a life sharing agency or a family individual. Second, the life sharing agency that provides the matching and holds the 245D license. And third, last but not least, the individual or family that wants to open their home and is licensed for no more than 2 people, that county license or tribal nation. Okay, next slide, please. This is a video that we're going to pop in the chat. We don't have time. To show it, but I'm just going to talk about the Life Sharing Coalition for a minute. Derek Dufresne was our keynote speaker, and this video talks a lot about matching and how it works and how sometimes it doesn't work. I encourage you to look at it. A little bit on this coalition. We had over 50 people in June that came together in Brainerd that met with Derek, and we talked about all the things we want to do, because moving forward, there is legislation that came out of the last session that calls for life sharing to be a codified waiver service in 2026. So if you're interested in being part of that coalition, email me. There's a very diverse group of people, from providers, counties, people with disabilities, family members, that are very interested in blowing this service up and making it more available. So find me with more questions on that. Next slide, please. I won't go over this too much, but this slide just talks about the ongoing support from the life sharing agency, the contracting matters. It's in the guidance. But again, what they do is they coordinate. We call it respite in Minnesota, but I call it backup support, help with documentation, help with teaching skills on person-centered practices, and explanation of rights and responsibilities. Not limited to this thing, but again, this life sharing coalition is kind of etching out some of these roles and responsibilities that we'll include in our service definition as we work towards codifying life sharing as a unique waiver service in Minnesota. Next slide, please. All right, this is pretty much the last one, and then I'll have some resources. So county can authorize that life sharing matching process, and a person could choose to move into a life sharing ongoing support arrangement that I talked about earlier. But if they want to go through that matching process, they can still choose to live in their own home. They might want that matching process to then shift on to a housing stabilization services worker that can help them find their own place. Another service, and again, this is on our website, utilization of the caregiver living expense, an individual living with a caregiver and that caregiver getting reimbursed, and them sharing a rental or owned place together. And then the matching process can occur if someone wants to move into family foster care. Family foster care is different than life sharing. Family foster care allows up to 4-person home being licensed. Okay, that's life sharing in a nutshell. You can advance the slides a little bit on the resources, and I can hit the pause button, but I know we're going to open it up to some panel discussion here too. So thanks for your time, and find me, and my contact information will be in here.
Thank you so much, Scott, for that overview. We went into life sharing just a little bit last time, and it was so awesome to have you here to really go into it. So thank you so much. I'll pass it off to Maddie, I think.
Great, thank you. We can take the slideshow down now, please, and move into our panel discussion. So we have Courtney, Charlie, Scott, and also Michael, who will be answering some questions that we have for them. We also received a couple of questions as people were registering, so we'll get to those. And again, feel free to pop any other questions in the chat, either with everyone or directly to me, and we will hopefully have time to get to all the questions today. So with that, I think we'll get started. And this first question is mostly for Scott and Courtney, but Charlie and Michael, feel free to speak up as well. Let's say someone doesn't have anyone in their life that they can live with, and they need support with personal cares. They don't want to live in a group home. What can they do?
Scott, do you want to start or you want me to?
Go ahead and start, and I'll play the cleanup hitter since we're in baseball season going into the World Series. How about that?
Sounds good. Yeah, and one of the common misconceptions is that if someone needs a lot of support, that they need to live in a group home. And I think, I mean, we went through life sharing today, and there's that whole matching process. And Scott can probably talk a little bit more about it, but there are all kinds of living arrangement options beyond a group home. You could have your own apartment. You could be living with a family. You might hear the term adult foster care. You could be living just with like a roommate who might support you, but you don't necessarily have to know anybody or have anybody in your life that can support you with those personal cares. And you might have people in your life that could help you in other ways. So going back to Charlie's circle mapping that she went over, there were all those different levels. So another one of the misconceptions is that you need to maybe find just one person to do everything. And you might not have that person in your life who can do all the things for you, but you might have multiple people who could help in small ways and kind of build that network and that robust network of supports around you versus just one person to provide you with that personal care support. So, Scott, do you have other thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a big question, and I think I'll just circle it back to informed decision making. It's my belief and perspective, and I know there's probably a lot of colleagues and across disability services that share these values, that it's about one person at a time, and really not putting any limits, regardless of the severity of someone's disability. I helped move 2,000 people to homes of their own as an alternative to congregate care. So if you tell me it can't be done, I'm going to say you're wrong, because now there's hundreds of housing stabilization services providers helping people move to their own home. But with that said, there is a robust service system. And I think what you don't know, you don't know. The Disability Hub is a great place to get information, minnesotahelp.info. And I think it starts, I mean, thinking about a person-centered plan, I think, is very important if you don't know, because I know one thing. The one thing I used to do, and I used to work as a provider many, many years ago, is I worked for a group home, and we just got in the van and went and did things. We went on vacations, and, we got those things authorized so people could just go experience things. Because if you don't experience things, you're never going to know what you like and don't like. And just note that our service system does have a variety of things. There's independent housing options. There's supported apartment programs. You can live in your own place. Thinking of all these barriers to housing, we used to admire them for about 5 minutes, and then we used to just go move people. That's That's my continued message from the start of housing access services to where it's at now. So I wouldn't limit anybody, but I think it really starts with a robust person-centered plan and getting the right people around you so you can make an informed decision. So that's my 2 cents. If that makes any sense. Questions or what?
That was great. Thank you, Scott. Anything to add, Courtney, before we move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I saw a similar question that kind of goes along with this one, and it was, what about people that have a lot of ADL needs or activities of daily living, like more physical assistance, they have more care needs, and I would just go back to what Scott said. I mean, it's all about mindset. It doesn't matter, how many support needs someone has. If you want it to be possible, it is possible. I've seen people who have lots and lots of support needs, who live in their own home. They have that robust network of supports, informal and formal, and they make it happen. So it is all about that mentality and finding an option, and if it doesn't exist, creating it.
Awesome.
Scott,
Thank
your
you for.
mic's off.
Oh,
Yeah. I just want to add one thing. If you're not aware of this contractor for the state, then they also bill technology for home, tech for home. They've done some wonderful things in helping people get set up with technology in their own home. And there's other agencies out there. I mean, we have things we didn't have 30 years ago when I started this work. Let's take advantage of it and help people get where they want.
great point. And thank you. Oh,
I
go
just
ahead,
had
Charlie.
one little thing. Sorry to interrupt. you,
Yeah,
Maddie.
go ahead. This is great. Such a thorough answer. We love it.
I just want to throw out that that I think a lot of it's really easy to think, well, I don't have anyone already, right? And I don't have anyone in my life that could be that for me, could be a support or could be any piece of the support I need. But I really, really encourage everybody to do the circle maps if you're in a moment where you're trying to find that that space to transition to. Do the circle maps activity, because there are a lot more people in our community and in our network than we like readily think of, as somebody who could be, that chosen family or that support for you. So do that activity and really like challenge yourself or challenge the person you're doing it with. It can be heavy and bring up, trigger some traumas throughout the conversation. So obviously, like, be conscious and careful while you're having these conversations. But encouraging someone to think about the people that are already existing in their life that love them, and thinking about those relationships to their potential full capacity, and not just limit it to where you're at right now with people. So just a little extra to think about.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Just really great discussion there. So the next question I have is, what kind of stigmas get in the way of informal hosting arrangements? What can we do about it? And I'm going to hand that question over to Michael and Charlie.
Well, I think Charlie, and is my audio okay? I'm in a different space than I normally am. Okay. Michael Giovannis, he, him pronouns, white male sitting behind a blue wall. I think, as Charlie touched on earlier, there's this, it's a logical fear, is that what if the relationship is exploitative or abusive, and the youth doesn't realize that, or realizes it but doesn't know how to address it. There's those concerns there. And I especially hear those concerns when we're talking about youth homelessness coming from the foster care system, of like, we should put them in the foster care system because that's safer, is kind of what I hear, which to me, is someone who's worked with the foster care system a lot, is an illogical conclusion, because I think the risk is still present in the foster care system. And I think, as Charlie said, if a youth is doing the circle map with a caseworker, a trusted person, that trusted person should be able to help talk through why maybe that is not a good hosting choice for that youth. And Charlie, you're more of a subject matter expert on that, so I'll let you touch on that in a second as well. But the other stigma around chosen family hosting I see, especially for youth, is that there's this, I personally believe, this subconsciously or unconsciously racist assumption frequently that, or prejudiced assumption that the community in which the youth exists is inherently unsafe, and therefore any hosting arrangement in that community is unsafe, which is just simply not true. So yeah, those are kind of the two big stigmas I see around youth chosen family hosting.
Thank you, Michael. Anything to add, Charlie?
Yeah, I think Michael, you hit the nail on the head with those two. I think those are the biggest stigmas involved in informal hosting. And I really like that you pointed out, and I just want to reiterate, being involved in the like foster system or any kind of human service system does not does not by any means remove the risk of abuse. It and you can see that in any statistics about abuse that people with disabilities experience, abuse that children experience in the system, even abuse that some caretakers experience. Like there's a lot of risk in every every human service field, I feel, and that just resembles our society. So I think when I'm thinking about the circle maps, what I'm imagining is we have a youth, especially youth is where close-knit is focused, but even if we're using this as a youth or an adult who is facing homelessness or is in a currently unsafe living situation, if we're using a tool like circle maps, hopefully that's being talked through or monitored by some kind of trusted individual to that youth or adult, right? So the conversation with circle maps, when we talk about what can we do about those risks, what we can do is simply be in community. I mean, I think we've all probably heard that the best way to prevent shoplifting in your store is to provide really good customer service, right? And you do that by greeting people when they come in the door and letting them know you notice them, right? I feel like we can translate that to this conversation. The best way to educate a young person about the relationships they're in and educate yourself about the relationships that people are in and whether they're safe or what dynamics make that safe is to have conversations openly. If you're scared to talk about what's happening in your relationship, that's kind of a red flag, right? So if, pointing that out to a young person is part of the process of starting that conversation and helping them realize for themselves. But I think the biggest thing you can do in a situation of informal or formal hosting, when stigmas come up, is to really think about, trusting the youth to come to their own conclusions through conversation, right? That's kind of your job as a parent, a caregiver, an adult in the life of anyone that you're supporting, whether it's a young person or somebody your age or even somebody older than you, is trusting them to come to the conclusion that is best for them, and that happens through conversation and openness. So Courtney, did you have anything you wanted to add? I know that we had you kind of listed as a responder for this too.
You covered it. Great.
Awesome. So I'm going to throw it back to you again, Charlie, with a follow-up. And what are some of the pros and cons to coming above board?
Actually, Michael, are you by chance wanting to?
Yeah. I
Sorry,
love
Maddie,
this
I'm gonna-
question, so I'm excited to take
Awesome.
it.
Thanks, Michael.
So pros and cons, above board, closely we call it under the radar, above board. And I will first say that everything I'm about to talk right now, we have documents from CloseNet, so I'm not pulling this out of the top of my head. So if you go to our website at closenet.us, you can find these documents that I'm pulling from here. And we have them made up in such a way that you can give them directly to youth and renters and homeowners. But so let's start with con. If the youth is going above board, the first thing you're going to think of is there going to be issues with the landlord? Will it be a violation of the guest policy? So you need to open a honest and clear dialogue with the landlord. And there's great services like I believe it's called MARS, and they're mediation services for tenants and landlords to mediate that conversation if that's needed. So that can be kind of the first con, if you will, but it's also pro because once you have gone through that conversation and you've established the relationship and the youth is above board, then it's a pro. The other cons that might be for going above board would be that the property owner could require a background check, and that can get in the way sometimes for justice involved people, or formerly justice involved people. And then another con, and it's kind of through our research we discovered, and we weren't necessarily thinking of this or expecting this, but that the youth may no longer be considered homeless, and they might lose access to some benefits or programs that they currently are receiving benefits from. Now, pros. The youth is able to live freely and openly. And as someone who was a homeless youth who was in chosen family hosting arrangements, I can speak to the fact that being below board is psychologically taxing. And you feel diminutive, you feel your existence is criminalized, you feel in survival mode in what is supposed to be your home. So bringing the youth hosting arrangement above board alleviates a lot of that psychological trauma that occurs. And in turn, it creates a sense of relief and belonging for the youth, which, again, I can speak to from personal experience, is absolutely critical in a journey to permanently exiting houselessness or housing instability. Another thing that we discovered through our research that we found, we were like, oh, this is interesting, we hadn't thought of that, was that now the youth actually has a place to receive mail and an address when they go to apply for jobs. They can put that address down. If they need a new birth certificate mailed to them or something, they can. They have a place where they know they can get mail. Another thing that can occur, it depends on how the relationship is structured on the lease and with the landlord, but the youth could start building rental history, which is incredibly important. Permanent address, again, mail, but it also gives the youth access to apply for more services. And then there's less likelihood of tension or the host having to ask the youth to leave, because when you're bringing the relationship above board, yes, you're working with the landlord to bring it above board, but we also have guides that we give to direct service providers at CloseNet where we have like a form, you could create a formalized agreement that with the person who is already renting the apartment. And I generally say renting rather than homeowner because a majority of people who are doing chosen family hosting, a majority of the time are renters. And so when it becomes above board, you're able to formalize that relationship in a much more permanent and stable way, which means that the host is much less likely to ask the youth to leave. So yeah, that is the pros and cons, like a very brief, high-level overview of the pros and cons of coming above board. Charlie, do you have anything?
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This question is really for everyone on the panel. Can you give examples of when life sharing has prevented homelessness?
Scott, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I met with this guy. I won't name the provider, but I'll just tell you a story. I apologize if I start coughing here. I might have to go. COVID really sucks. I've avoided it for 4 years, so here we are. Um, he was hospitalized over 30 different times. It teeters on homelessness because, what happens is people are discharged and they don't have anywhere to go. One of the things that happens when you're hospitalized with, significant mental health related disabilities and maybe CD, chemical dependency, you come out of the hospital and you've lost all your friends, all your relationships. And the funny thing is, just ironic, this nurse that was in the hospital working with this individual, supporting him, they got to know each other. And to me, it was kind of a natural support kind of matching process that occurred. And this nurse found out about this opportunity to, actually get paid through family residential services to support a person. And so they started talking as a team with the case manager. And I just think that's one example. There's actually, there's a video on it. If I can find it, I'll post it. But there's a provider that put a video together on this. But I think to really just point blank answer your question, I can't answer that question because I think anyone is on the verge of homelessness at any point in time. If I lose my job, get really sick or something like that, acquire a mental health disability that leads to imprisonment. I mean, at the department, we see it all with our hospital system, acute care, homeless population. I mean, I'm just walking through St. Paul in certain areas, and I see a higher population just because I've been here so long. It's real, and I think preventing homelessness isn't just tied to life sharing because what I said, it's one choice amongst many, and there's a bunch of different ways, to hopefully get upstream and understand what's happening before it leads to homelessness. But let's just be real. I mean, it's a real problem, not only in Minnesota but all over the country. I look at the St. Louis County region in that area. You walk downtown, Duluth and see what's going on. There's just a huge concentration of people with mental health disabilities being served in facilities. And a lot of people just choose not to receive services because of the complexities of their disabilities. And it's real. And I would say there's not one solution for world peace. So don't think that life sharing is a solution for world peace and ending homelessness. It's one thing that might work for some people. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Scott. Does anyone else have anything to add?
I mean, I guess when I was a little runaway punk kid, I had a buddy who was also homeless, and he had chronic health conditions that required medication and physical therapy. And he wasn't able to stay at home. It wasn't a safe relationship with him and his father. And so he ran away basically like me and went to his grandmother's house. And she was actually, going to this, driving him to the physical therapy classes, driving him and helping him get his prescriptions filled and those kind of things. And then eventually he felt really guilty staying with her, like he was taking a burden on her. And, there's some other factors, and he ran away again from her place. But then as a result, he stopped going to physical therapy. He stopped getting his prescriptions, and his health deteriorated, and he's no longer with us. And it's like, I always wondered, like, if that relationship was actually supported and nurtured that he had with his grandmother, like, what could have been. And so, yeah, that's an example that I think about a lot.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Michael. Yeah, I think that is a really important point to make and a great example of why this work is so important. So we are coming up on time here. We do have one more question to answer that we received before registration that I want to get to. So that question is, what happens to families that get put on the back burner or dropped from waiting lists that have been on them for over a year? So I'm going to turn that over to Courtney to answer before our event ends today.
Wow, I'll try to be quick on this one. And I think it's been a theme today that there's not one answer. And it really depends on what kind of waiting list you're talking about. I mean, there's waiting lists all over the place for housing services or for a particular like residence, if that's what you're looking for, or to get a particular company or staff. So it really depends on what kind of waiting list you're talking about. So there's not necessarily one answer there, but I think consistency and persistence would be my answer in continuing to try. Maybe whatever option you were on the waiting list for isn't panning out, and so you've got to try other things. In Minnesota, we're very lucky to have many options for not only for housing but for support in housing and in being in your home and staying in your home or finding a home. So we have all these different options, and I would say if one of them isn't panning out, be persistent and keep trying. This is something that I would say to contact the ARC, contact Disability Hub, somebody. There are organizations out there that can help navigate those sorts of things.
Great, thank you. On that note, Caitlin, if we could pull up the final slide, that will include contact information for our panelists today. Again, we will be sending out a copy of the presentation. I believe there's a link to it in chat already. So you will be able to have access to all of these links, including that video that Scott mentioned. So if you need to reach out, here's some contact information. Thank you so much to our presenters, our panelists today, just such rich and important insights and knowledge that you shared. And thank you for everyone for joining us today.